They thought she was the new intern. Then she unfolded a worn dossier, titled Confirmed Kills, Galactic Sector 7 to 9. The room, buzzing with offhand comments and smug laughter, went dead quiet. Chairs froze mid-spin. One officer actually dropped his coffee. Celine had stepped into the briefing room like a shadow slipping past the edge of attention. Her boots made no sound, her posture was casual, and her face wore that unreadable calm that people usually confuse for timidity. She was 35, maybe younger, hard to tell with the visor cap pulled low and no rank pins on her jacket. Just another admin transfer, they all thought, probably assigned to fix a glitch in the reports or alphabetize old war logs. That's how she was greeted, with chuckles, side eyes, and one lieutenant muttering something about HR sending another coffee girl. He even pointed to the dispenser in the back of the room and smiled wide like he'd cracked a joke worth repeating. She didn't respond. Instead, Celine took the seat at the far end of the oval table. Not near the screen, not near the command seat. Just there. Watching. Listening. Her eyes, a cold gray that didn't seem to blink enough, scanned the room as if measuring it. The station's main operations hub, Outpost Vega 91, was a sleek tower of silver walls and reinforced glass built on a rotating asteroid. From the outside, it looked like a perfect cog in the Galactic Federation's war engine. On the inside, it reeked of bureaucracy, power games, and a healthy dose of corruption. The officers at this particular outpost were known for their arrogance. They'd risen through the ranks fast, some with stellar records, others through favors and erased files. They lived on cigar smoke, performance pills, and the comforting lie that war made them untouchable. Until Celine opened the dossier. She laid it on the table with a deliberate motion, letting the cover tilt just enough to be read by those nearest. No crest, no standard file header, just a thin black title burned into the surface like a scar. Confirmed kills, Galactic Sector 7 to 9. And then she spoke quietly, like she was reciting a grocery list. Lieutenant Creven Dax. Unauthorized orbital strike over Hera 4. Civilian body count, 137. Executed via decompression lock override. Creven stopped chewing his protein gum. Commander Ryalt Nor. Weapons trafficking from Delta Forge. Direct links to 4 pirate clans. Disappeared 3 months ago. Confirmed neutralized. Body incinerated. The room wasn't quiet anymore. It was silent. Captain Marative. Accepted bribes to reassign frontline soldiers into active death zones. 52 confirmed wrongful deaths. Executed slowly. Suffocation chamber lockout. 4 hours. Now, the colonel who had ordered her to bring coffee leaned forward, squinting at the file. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Celine turned her gaze to him and paused. Colonel Eldrin Voss. The air got thinner. You reassigned multiple evidence files linked to these cases into blackout folders. Suppressed whistleblower reports. Ordered 2 strategic disappearances. One of them, my partner. His jaw tightened, but still, no one moved. Then a soft chirp echoed through the room, the terminal screens lighting up, one by one, as the station's internal system synced with Celine's override. A crimson authorization window blinked onto the main monitor, clearance level, Omega Violet. The colonel blinked. That wasn't possible. Violet level clearance didn't exist. At least, not officially. She stood. Effective immediately, this outpost is under investigation. Command logs, security files, biometric entries, and external signal relays will be reviewed in real time. Anyone attempting to tamper, delay, or falsify evidence will be listed as non-cooperative. Non-cooperatives are removed. A silence spread like frostbite. One officer slowly reached toward his communicator. The man next to him subtly elbowed him in the ribs and shook his head. Celine caught it. She didn't smile. Just stared. Any questions? No one raised a hand. Outside, through the transparent wall panels, the vacuum of space stared back at them, silent, dark, vast. It had seen things. It would see more. Later that day, the hallway buzzed with whispers. Celine's name wasn't even known, but the stories were already blooming like weeds in a garden of fear. Some said she was Federation Black Ops. Others claimed she was a synthetic executioner built in Sector 9. One rumor had her listed as a defector, cleared only because she turned in 37 war criminals and a sitting admiral in a single mission. She walked through it all like a ghost. A young ensign accidentally bumped into her near the weapon's wing and dropped his data pad. She bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. He thanked her shakily. She nodded once and moved on. In her quarters, she sat cross-legged on the floor, flicking through data streams and biometric readings from the last 6 months of station activity. Her silent aide, a half-cybernetic entity named Ven, stood behind her like a shadow against the far wall, arms crossed. His face was unreadable, half covered in synth skin, the other half marked with scars and tech ports. "They're already trying to reassign logs," he said quietly. "Let them," she replied. "You want them to panic? I want them to expose themselves. Panic will do." At midnight station time, the emergency lights flickered. A secondary override pinged the central system. It wasn't hers. She tracked the source in seconds, someone trying to erase a Level 6 report from 5 months ago. A whistleblower report. She tapped a button. The erase code failed. A new entry blinked on her kill list. She stared at it, sighed softly, then whispered, "Next." And then, without a word, opened a drawer and placed a small glass vial beside her knee. It was filled with something dark, slow-moving, and very final. Outside, the station spun silently on the edge of a dead star's gravity field, unaware that justice had already walked in the front door, and it had a list. The moment her name surfaced in the officer mess hall logs, everything changed. Celine didn't need to announce her authority anymore. Her very presence pulled silence into every room she entered. But that didn't mean the others had given up. No, they simply changed their tactics. The junior officers kept their heads down and avoided eye contact. The senior ones smiled a little too wide. They were buying time. They assumed she was on a deadline. That once she finished whatever vendetta she'd come for, she'd disappear back into whatever Black Ops hole she'd come from. They had no idea that Celine didn't operate on time constraints. She operated on completion. And her list wasn't a guess. It was a death sentence waiting for verification. Inside the command analytics room, the lights stayed low, not by design, but because Celine had overridden the brightness to better read facial temperature fluctuations from the biometric logs. The station's command system, nicknamed Halberd, had been logging daily readings on every ranking officer, including oxygen irregularities, shift-based neural patterns, and residual biometric trauma scans. Most officers thought those metrics were just technical noise buried in the deep system, too random to matter. Celine's mind, however, was a web of pattern recognition. And once she saw them layered together, the data stopped being numbers. It became confessions. Lieutenant Arvin had no idea his tendency to overclock the internal lift system at 0230 hours coincided with black market message pings coming from a transmitter embedded in his glove. But Celine did. Captain Lorno had been rerouting surplus rations into unauthorized cargo containers. But the trail only made sense when you tracked the missing canisters using reflected ship heat signatures at the docking bay. Celine tracked it all. Names started aligning with infractions like dominoes poised to fall. Each flick of her finger across the data stream marked someone who had either lied, buried evidence, or turned a blind eye. Each name she marked with a subtle gesture. Not allowed. Never allowed. She nodded slightly, and then would quietly add the name to a secondary file labeled pending. Meanwhile, in the officer lounge, the mood was rapidly curdling from cocky to combustible. The more observant officers noticed that Celine's investigation wasn't linear. She didn't follow standard trails. She jumped timelines, skipped protocols, and always ended up somewhere no one else was supposed to look. And she wasn't hiding it. She walked through restricted doors like they weren't there, reviewed top clearance files without waiting for permission, and worse, somehow got the station's artificial intelligence to answer questions even the command staff couldn't unlock. The AI, which hadn't spoken to anyone in over 3 years, replied to Celine's voice within seconds. It wasn't respect. It was programming. She had access that went beyond rank. One officer, Colonel Drex, realized too late that trying to sweet-talk her might be his only shot. He was tall, polished, and had built his reputation on charm and tactical improvisation. He invited her to dinner in the officers' mess under the pretext of offering classified insight into the late commander's disappearance. She agreed, which confused everyone. Celine didn't strike them as the negotiation type. But when she showed up, she wore the same expression she always had, neutral, unreadable, surgical. Colonel Drex poured 2 drinks, made a speech about wartime decisions being messy, hinted at mutual understanding. Celine said nothing. Then, just as he started a monologue about internal loyalty and survival through compromise, she placed a small data pad on the table. On it was a single entry, a past alias used by Drex during his early field work. An alias erased from most databases. Except hers. She didn't accuse. She didn't threaten. She simply slid the datapad forward and set a black vial beside it. His smile vanished. She stood and left without a word. Behind her, Drex stared at the vial, understanding its meaning instantly. He had about 6 hours to decide what to do with his remaining freedom. Maybe less. Back in the analytics core, Celine's eyes locked onto a new data fragment, an anomaly in one of the backup signal relays. It wasn't an error. It was a looped signal, short range, repeating every 22 minutes. That frequency didn't match any Federation protocol. It was older. Cold War era code. She amplified it. A single name pulsed through the frequency, Velen 7. That wasn't a person. That was a classified operation. And it had been shut down nearly a decade ago. Officially, at least. Celine tapped into the relay's physical coordinates and traced the signal's source. It came from a cryo-holding chamber buried 2 levels below the main structure, a level marked sealed. She went there alone. Inside the cryo bay, light barely reached the frost-covered pods. Most were empty, long defunct. But one, Pod 14, still hummed. Inside, suspended in a fluid glow, floated a figure barely alive. His pulse flickered faintly on the cryo monitor. His nameplate had been scorched off, but Celine already knew who he was. Arwyel Tavik. Former Internal Affairs officer, declared dead 5 years ago after exposing a major weapons laundering scheme involving several high-ranking fleet officials. His disappearance had shut down 5 investigations and sent the galaxy spinning in confusion. Now here he was, not dead. Just frozen. And hidden. Then arrived minutes later, silent as ever, and handed her a portable diagnostics core. She uploaded Tavik's medical records and cross-checked the cryodata against station logs. Someone had reactivated the pod 3 weeks ago. They weren't going to thaw him. They were going to recycle the pod entirely. Incineration through atmospheric discharge. A clean erase. Celine stood still, staring at the floating man. He was never meant to be found, she said flatly. But someone triggered the signal, then replied. Probably when the audit started. It was a kill order in disguise. Too late for that now. She transferred Tavik's cryobed to her secured bay using manual override codes. The system protested but relented. No one argued with Omega Violet access. Back in the command room, Celine reviewed everything again. Patterns, movements, crosstalks. Each data thread now wove into a singular tapestry of cover-ups and corruption that stretched across half the station's leadership. But it wasn't revenge she felt. It was something colder. Something deliberate. Then the system pinged again. A new name had attempted to access the kill list. Not download it. Just view it. Celine stared at the name, General Khazar. She didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly walked to the interface, updated the file, and added his name manually. Not to the pending list. To the confirmed one. Then she powered down the lights, leaned back in her chair, and said nothing for a very long time. The list was now moving ahead of schedule. And General Khazar didn't know it yet, but his fate had already been processed. All that remained was delivery. The next 48 hours passed like a slow pulse through the veins of Outpost Vega 91. The atmosphere on the command deck was a quiet panic, stitched together by forced small talk and twitchy hands. Everyone pretended to be fine, but nothing about the station was normal anymore. Schedules were disrupted, patrol logs edited 3 times a day, and the usual echo of booths in the halls felt more like a countdown than routine. Celine didn't need to accuse anyone directly. Her silence did the heavy lifting. The more she observed, the more they confessed through their movements, some trying to scrub files, others creating false trails or sending desperate off-grid messages they thought wouldn't be traced. But everything left fingerprints, and Celine had made a career out of lifting prints from the void. Her private quarters now resembled a quiet war room. One section of the wall was filled with shifting schematics of the station, red indicators marking power spikes and unauthorized access attempts. Another screen tracked inter-system communications, filtered through linguistic pattern recognition software. A third screen was dedicated solely to Tavik, the cryo-rescued internal affairs officer. He was alive but still unconscious, his body in medical repair stasis while automated systems attempted to restore damaged neural pathways. Every few hours, his biometric feedback changed, slight spikes suggesting memory stimulation or subconscious response. Celine didn't push it. She just waited. Tavik held memories that someone wanted buried so badly they froze him beneath a military outpost. That kind of effort wasn't for convenience. It was fear. What Celine hadn't expected was to find a hidden access code buried within the cryo unit's maintenance log. Someone had used a master key to suppress the pod's emergency signal. That code didn't belong to any officer currently on board. It belonged to someone who was supposed to be dead, Commander Elric Thorne, the station's former leader who had vanished during a hyperspace maneuver 8 months earlier. Officially listed MIA. Unofficially, presumed defected or dead. But the signature on that access override was fresh, 3 weeks old. And Celine knew exactly what that meant. Somewhere deep inside the walls of Vega 91, someone was still hiding him. She traced the power logs to a section of the station once used for armory overflow during wartime but had since been sealed off. The corridors were tight, dark, and lined with dormant systems. Maintenance droids hadn't patrolled this level in over a year. She moved without sound, accompanied only by Ven, who watched the darkness like it might lunge at them. They passed sealed hatches and half-burned warning signs until they reached a bulkhead that had been welded shut. Celine pressed her hand to the panel beside it and let the system scan her clearance. The weld locks hissed, and the metal door creaked open just enough to let them through. Inside was a forgotten bunker, once used for ammunition control. Now it looked like a repurposed cell. On the far end of the room sat a man slumped against the wall, gaunt but unmistakable, Elric Thorne. His beard was rough, his eyes bloodshot but alive. He didn't speak as she entered. He just looked at her like someone who had been waiting a very long time. Celine didn't waste time. "You triggered the cryo failsafe." He nodded, slowly. "You knew I'd come." "I didn't know your face," he said hoarsely. "But I knew your work." She crouched in front of him, her expression unreadable. "Why fake your death?" "I uncovered the armory deals. Same ones Tavik was tracking. When I tried to report it up the chain, the orders came back to erase both of us. Tavik didn't make it to the shuttle. I barely did." "Who gave the orders?" Thorne hesitated. Then, quietly, "General Khazar. Through intermediaries. But the chain of names stops before it ever reaches him. That's how he operates." Whispers and disappearances. Celine stood and activated her recorder, not because she needed proof, but because the truth mattered more when spoken. Thorne gave names, codes, locations of cargo handoffs. He even revealed the identity of the data forger responsible for cleaning the officer's records, someone still stationed on Vega 91. Her name was Lieutenant Mara Norin, a tech officer who ran the communications desk on the 3rd level. A name Celine had already marked as likely. By the time Celine and Ben returned to the main station floors, 3 more officers had requested unscheduled transfers off the post. One had already boarded a scout-class vessel. She let him leave. He wasn't on the list, but his panic had confirmed something else. People were beginning to run. That meant they knew she wasn't bluffing. The list was real. And so were the consequences. In the officer lounge, Mara Noren sat alone, sipping a stimulant drink and scrolling through logistics reports. When Celine entered, the woman didn't flinch. She knew the game was over. "You found Thorn," Mara said, setting her cup down carefully. "I did." "Then I assume you already know I've been cleaning files since before his disappearance." Celine sat across from her eyes scanning Mara's posture like a puzzle she already knew how to solve. "You're not surprised." "I'm exhausted," Mara replied. "You think I did it for credits. I didn't. I did it because I thought I was protecting order. But there's no order, is there? Just tiers of who's allowed to bury what." Celine paused, then asked, "Why stay?" Mara stared into her drink. "To watch it fall apart." Celine nodded. "You're not on the kill list." "Yet." Mara raised her eyes. "What would put me on it?" Celine didn't answer. She just stood, leaving a small black chip on the table. "That's a full report of every file you've touched. Wipe it from the system by midnight. Confess it, forward it, burn it, I don't care. But if you log one more falsified record after this hour, you'll know where you stand." Mara stared at the chip, then at Celine's back as she walked away. Then, as always, followed silently. Later that night, Mara's workstation lit up with outbound transmissions, not just deletions, but confession packets routed to the internal command tribunal. It was a risk. She knew it. But she also knew the alternative. Celine sat alone in the cryo room beside Tavik, who stirred slightly for the first time in hours. His lips moved without sound. She leaned in. "Who's next?" he whispered, as if remembering something too heavy to carry. Celine opened her file. There were now 16 confirmed names, 7 marked as removed, 5 listed as unstable, and 4 marked imminent. At the top, recently added, was General Khazar. The station's lights dimmed into night cycle. But for Celine, the mission had no cycle. The list didn't sleep. And the next phase was about to begin. The arrival of General Khazar should have brought order. That was the expectation among the remaining officers on Vega 91. After all, he was one of the highest-ranking figures in the Galactic Federation's war branch, a man with medals that outnumbered his confirmed kills, and a voice that could shift star routes with a single command. His cruiser docked with the grace of military precision, flanked by 2 smaller escort crafts whose weapons were primed but dormant, just enough of a show to remind the station who was really in charge. As he stepped onto the docking platform, every security officer straightened, every admin snapped to attention, and every corrupt officer took a silent breath of hope. They believed the nightmare was about to end. They believed he would remove Celine like flicking dust from a polished desk. Celine didn't greet him. She watched from the shadows of the upper corridor, arms crossed, visor lowered. She didn't need to be near him to understand his posture. The way he walked, deliberate but relaxed, told her everything. He wasn't here to investigate. He was here to perform. Khazar didn't come to clean. He came to erase. An hour later, he called a public station assembly in the main hall. All ranking officers were required to attend. No exceptions. Celine walked in 5 minutes late. On purpose. Heads turned, some wide-eyed, some nervously half-turned as if proximity to her might trigger suspicion. She took a position against the back wall, hands in her coat pockets, gaze locked on the stage where Khazar stood in full dress uniform, a crimson stripe running down his sleeve like a blood vein. He began with pleasantries. Standard morale talk. Praise for service, mention of sacrifice, acknowledgement of the strain of high-alert operations. Then his tone shifted. He spoke of disorder, of unauthorized internal probes, of a rogue element operating without Federation sanction. He never said her name. He didn't have to. Every officer in that room knew exactly who he meant. When he finally turned toward her, only then did Celine speak. "Would you like to see the files?" she asked, her voice cutting through the chamber like a scalpel. Khazar's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flinched. "You've accessed materials above your classification." "My classification is above yours," she replied calmly. "Omega Violet. You can verify with your command AI. Or perhaps you'd prefer I read the names aloud?" There was a moment of perfect stillness. No one moved. The silence had texture now, thick, pressing, like the moment before an explosion. Khazar took a breath, gestured to the attending security officers, and issued the words they'd all been waiting to hear. "Arrest her." 4 armed guards moved toward Celine. None of them reached her. Because the lights went out. In less than a second, the entire station was plunged into darkness. Emergency red lighting flickered on, casting the room in hellish hues. Sirens began to sound, short bursts, not warning tones, but activation codes. Celine didn't flinch. She had triggered it. From a micro-sealed chip embedded beneath her right thumbnail, a single pulse had activated protocols that no one else on the station even knew existed. Doors sealed. Weapons systems locked. The AI, Halberd, re-engaged its dormant defense subroutines. It only spoke once, in a voice that sounded like metal unraveling. "Protocol Echo 0 confirmed. Executing." Khazar barked orders, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden clatter of gunfire in the distance, automated turrets clearing the hangar bays of retreating personnel. The entire station was locking down. And Celine was already gone. She moved through the station like a shadow, Ven flanking her side, uploading codes, rerouting pathways, and severing communication links to the outer systems. They didn't need to run. They needed to isolate. And one by one, the remaining names on the list were being removed. Colonel Drex's quarters were found empty, but his comm logs betrayed him. A remote detonation was triggered from within his abandoned vessel, set to go off the moment he attempted to power up. The hangar lit up with flames seconds later. Lieutenant Arvin tried to flee through the maintenance tunnels. He was met by an automated defense drone programmed to recognize his heat signature. He didn't make it past Subdeck 3. 2 others attempted to delete themselves from the system entirely, wiping their bioscans and replacing them with temporary contractor identities. It might have worked if Celine hadn't already reprogrammed the bioscan mainframe. When they passed through the mess hall checkpoint, the floor simply opened beneath them. One drop. No second chances. In the command chamber, Khazar stood alone with 6 remaining officers, all sweating beneath their polished armor. The cameras that once fed him station-wide surveillance now showed nothing but static and blinking red skulls. One officer began to mutter a prayer. Another reached for his sidearm, not in aggression, but in desperation. Khazar slapped the weapon from his hand and cursed the silence. He had underestimated her. He thought she was a scalpel. But she was a warhead. The main doors slid open. Celine walked in, calm, composed, sleeves rolled. Then followed silent, holding a single display pad showing the confirmed kill list. It now had 17 names marked with a red bar. The last 5 were flashing. Khazar's name was one of them. "You're acting without Federation approval," Khazar said, voice steadier than expected. "I'm acting on Federation approval," Celine replied. "You just haven't seen the order yet." She tapped her wrist. A transmission began to play, loud and clear, echoing through the chamber. It was the voice of Supreme Marshal Rin, head of the Federation Judicial Tribunal. Dated 3 months ago. The message was unambiguous. "Special Operative Celine Valkyrie is hereby authorized under Directive 7 Black to identify, neutralize, and process any and all officers found to be operating in violation of wartime ethics, corruption statutes, or security breaches against the Galactic Constitution. Her judgment is final. No appeal. No override." The message ended. The room fell into a second silence. Khazar stepped back. "Even if I'm guilty, this isn't justice. No. Celine said, stepping forward. This is consequence. And then, for the first time, she pulled her sidearm. It didn't glow. It didn't make a sound. It simply existed, matte and cold, pointed at the man who had orchestrated half the deaths on her list. But she didn't fire. She handed it to Ven. Confession. Public broadcast. I want them all to hear it. Khazar stared at her, seething, but said nothing. Then he laughed, slow, bitter. You think this changes anything? It already has. And outside the sealed chamber, across the galaxy, dozens of small Federation posts began receiving encrypted messages, recordings, logs, confessions. Celine had never been alone. She had always been the spear point of a much larger truth. One that no uniform could stop now. Vega 91 wouldn't recover from this. And Celine didn't want it to. Because corruption doesn't heal. It burns. 4-0. The transmission was already viral before the doors of the command chamber fully sealed. Across the galaxy, screens lit up with General Khazar's confession. It was a raw, unscripted spiral of truth, fear, and a man unraveling under the weight of everything he had buried. There were no edits, no strategic pauses. Just a high-ranking war officer admitting to ghost operations, falsified combat losses, prisoner-for-profit deals, and the deliberate suppression of whistleblowers. His voice cracked halfway through. Not out of remorse. But because he knew, truly knew, that he was no longer powerful. Celine had taken that from him the moment she walked into the room. The confession ended with a single sentence that was replayed in a loop on civilian channels and Federation networks alike. If you're watching this, I wasn't the only one. On Vega 91, the station was quiet. Not in the way of celebration or peace, but in that strange, heavy quiet that comes after a storm has ripped everything bare. The corridors were scattered with overturned chairs, abandoned datapads, and the scent of spent power cores still lingering from the internal lockdown protocols. No alarms. No orders. Just silence. The kind that lingers when justice has just finished speaking. Celine walked alone down the corridor to the subdeck where Tavik was recovering. His cryo chamber had been removed days ago and replaced with a clean medbay setup under full monitoring. The station's MedAI reported improvement, stabilized vitals, slow but consistent neural activity. But it was still unclear how much of his mind had survived the years of stasis. When she entered, his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, following the slow pattern of lights overhead. He turned his head slightly as she approached. You really did it, he said, voice weak but present. Celine sat beside him, saying nothing. They said you were theoretical, Tavik added. A contingency if everything fell apart. I was, she replied. Until everything did. He gave a short laugh, which turned into a cough. What now? She didn't answer immediately. She let the quiet settle between them like dust. Khazar's ship is impounded. His staff are being processed. All outgoing transmission data has been rerouted through my authority chain. Federation intelligence will sweep through the next layer now. I was the tip. They're the blade. Tavik looked at her for a long moment. You're not staying. No. Because there's another list. Celine's eyes didn't move, but the edge of her jaw tightened. Yes. He nodded, accepting it like someone reading the next chapter of a familiar story. Ven appeared at the doorway then, holding a new datapad. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Celine stood, took the pad, and scanned its contents. It was short. One name. One location. Deep sector, off the usual charts, a black site rumored to be decommissioned. But if this name was on the new list, it meant it wasn't. She tapped the corner of the pad and encrypted it into her core memory system. Tavik watched her with eyes that had seen too much. They'll hunt you. They've tried. They'll try harder. Let them. Down in the lower docking bay, Celine's vessel, a retrofitted stealth-class interceptor, was being refueled. Sleek and matte with no visible ID tags, it looked like it didn't belong in this era. That was the point. Celine approached it slowly, her coat sweeping slightly behind her as she walked. 2 technicians saluted out of reflex, even though she wore no insignia. She returned the gesture with a nod and boarded without a word. Then followed silently, as always. Once inside, the cabin lit up in soft blue. Not cold. Just quiet. Her fingers hovered over the controls for a moment. Not hesitation, calibration. This wasn't over. The mission was never designed to be over. One list ended. Another began. Justice didn't come in clean chapters. It bled from one name to the next. As the ship disengaged from Vega 91, the automated voice of Halbert offered a final report. All unauthorized personnel purged. Internal corruption index cleared. Command authority transferred. Celine didn't respond. Outside the viewport, the stars looked different. Not because they were, but because she was. Each one felt like a silent witness to something unspoken. They watched her. Just like she watched them. Within an hour, the story of what happened at Vega 91 spread faster than any military cover-up could contain. Civilians posted clips. Journalists leaked records. Former officers began to talk. And one after another, the systems that had thrived under secrecy started to crack. Some commanders resigned overnight. Others vanished. A few tried to deny everything, but the data couldn't be burned anymore. Celine's files had been uploaded across 5 separate archival networks, all with lockproof verification. What she'd done wasn't just clean up. It was exposure. And exposure doesn't wait. In a quiet station orbiting a mining world on the edge of the Delca Fringe, a young cadet watched the broadcast and saw Celine's face for the first time. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't giving a speech. She was just walking out of the command chamber, eyes steady, jaw set. The cadet stared for a long time and then opened a hidden folder stored under false training files. Inside were 2 names. One was her commanding officer. The other was her father. In another system, a former operative burned his own dossier before it could be found. But the echo of his name was already queued in Celine's next data package. Back aboard her ship, Celine sat alone with the new list glowing in her hands. One name. Just one. She didn't need anything more. She whispered something to herself then. Not loud. Not for anyone else to hear. Just a promise. Or maybe a reminder. The ship turned toward the void, past map systems and into the dark unknown. Then adjusted their course with a flick of his wrist. No coordinates announced. No transmission sent. Just movement. Justice didn't need applause. Only action.